Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy who is something of a society himself, and we have a whole host of new Justice League Snyder cut updates that we need to talk about. Zack has just dropped a big interview with Vanity Fayre discussing the true story behind his cut of Justice League and the issues that we never knew about until now. In this video, we're going to be going over it all, as well as some of the new images of the film, including a Jesus Christ Joker that some are saying is god awful. I have a different opinion though, but we'll get into it later on, and if you enjoy the video then please drop a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel for breakdowns like this each and every day. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this, now let's get into the video. Okay, so the article goes into a lot of information on both the production of Justice League, the death of Zack's daughter, and the general feeling towards this release. Justice League is a strange story that's difficult to really fully comprehend in its entirety due to the sheer amount of back and forth that there was behind the scenes. There were constant production changes that ultimately led to the mess that we got, and the potential vindication that is coming around the corner. Now, though Snyder's name is in the credits of the theatrical release, it has been widely said that Snyder himself has never actually watched it, and the Vanity Fair article starts off by saying that it was his wife Deborah who advised him not to. Deborah is a high-ranking producer in Warner Brothers, and even though she has a lot of power within the company, the article states that it didn't really allow for her to intervene in what was clearly a mess. It turns out that the film was actually shown to Deborah and a number of high-ranking Warner Brothers associates, including Christopher Nolan. Deborah stated, "It was just weird. It's a weird experience. I don't know how many people have that experience. You've worked on something for a long time, and then you leave, and then you see what happened to it." Together, she and Nolan made a pact that they would make sure Zack never saw it, and to this day, he still hasn't. Now, we of course know what the result of the film was, and it becomes clear when reading the work that Warner Brothers were a team of executives who were very much like the League themselves, constantly in doubt over their actions. Batman v Superman had underperformed both critically and commercially, and DC believed that the reason Marvel outperformed them was because of the studio's vibrant and colourful characters. There then came a big turning point when Snyder sadly took her own life after battling with depression. This was a massively tragic moment for the Snyders, and exhausted from battling with the studio, they decided to put the focus of their fighting spirit back onto their family. The Snyder Cut will be dedicated to Zack's daughter, and the director confirmed that the movie will end with the words "for autumn" appearing in the credits. The article is very heartbreaking, as it does go into his daughter's death and their life together. Throughout it, Snyder refers to her as the only daughter of his children, and still talks about autumn in the present tense, showing how much he still loves her. It turns out that Hallelujah was actually her favourite song, and this also explains why it's so layered throughout Snyder's work. At the end of the Snyder Cut, the song will be performed by Alison Krauss, who also sang it at Autumn's funeral. It is of course totally understandable why he wanted to step back, but he and Deborah did soldier on for 2 months trying to get the film finished. However, the constant battles and anguish that they must have faced would have torn most people apart, and I don't think that anyone could blame them in the slightest for stepping back. However, their departure left a huge vacuum that needed to be filled. Though it was always publicised that Snyder handpicked his replacement, this was far from the truth, and thus Warner Bros. Turned to someone who had already pulled off the superhero team formula. That was Joss Whedon, the director of Avengers, who had clearly caught lightning in a bottle whilst working for Marvel, and whatever you think of the director as a person, professionally it's easy to see why his comic book movies are held in such high regards. The director was brought on to quote-unquote save the project, but as the saying goes, you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Warner Bros. Didn't like the first cut of the film, and they wanted the reshoots accomplished quickly, but it's now become clear that Whedon took on a lot more than he was expected to, and he completely changed the film and direction of the universe. Justice League was hated by critics, mocked because of its lackluster CGI, and it turns out that the behaviour on set was worse than Henry Cavill's mustache. Vanity Fair states that in public, everyone involved with the movie smiled, but it was a big financial loss for the studio, and it was dwarfed less than a year later by Infinity War, which completely dusted the film at the box office. It's a shame because this movie had so much potential. The article discusses when Snyder first cast Gal Gadot in Batman v Superman, and how this pretty much changed her life forever. Gadot was on the brink of quitting the business and being done with Hollywood, but this was her last audition, so she thought she'd go along. Snyder instantly fell in love with her take, and the rest is of course history. Snyder really wanted to reinvent these characters and offer new interpretations that hadn't been seen before. This was of course present in his Man of Steel take, but it was also brought across to his version of Aquaman, a character who up until this point had been seen as a joke. Snyder said that the studio gave him the power to do whatever he wanted, but this always meant that he went somewhere other than they wanted. The interview mentions that originally Snyder wanted to have Bruce Wayne fall in love with Lois Lane, and though their names rhymed, I did kinda roll my eyes at this bit when reading it, and it seems like Warner Brothers did too, as they stepped in and put a stop to it. Snyder stated the intention was that Bruce fell in love with Lois, and then realised that the only way to save the world was to bring Superman back to life. So he had this conflict, because Lois of course was still in love with Superman. Snyder said, "We had this beautiful speech where Bruce said to Alfred, 'I never had a life outside of the cave, I never imagined a world for me beyond this, but this woman makes me think that if I can get this group of gods together, then my job is done. I can quit, I can stop.' And that of course doesn't work out for him." Now personally, I can see why Warner Brothers were hesitant over this direction too, and it's probably because of ideas like this that they started to try and rein in the director. We now know that though Snyder wasn't fired because of his choices, he was still heavily watched. Warner Brothers appointed people to look over him in the form of Jeff Johns and John Berg, who had their own ideas for the production. No matter what, at least one of them had to be on set every day, and the control Snyder had slowly started to be reined in and turned to the dark side. Warner Bros. Wanted a big billion-dollar blockbuster that broke the bank at the box office, and they put the two watchdogs on him to make sure that the movie performed to their high expectations. However, their choices probably did more harm than help. Snyder said that he felt they were there to pretty much babysit him, and the pair attempted to inject humour into the piece, even though it wasn't really the tone that Zack was going for. The CEO at Warner Brothers also saw a cut of the film, and he wanted to make several changes to the movie, including its length. Warner Brothers wanted to be able to show the movie as many times as possible as they could throughout the day in cinemas, and thus a 2-hour length was mandated and forced upon Zack. This of course caused issues, as Snyder had already built certain parts of the film to rely on, well, other parts of the film. If you've seen the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman, then you'll know that the entire movie feels like a house of cards, and when you remove one, the entire thing falls down, and you pretty much get the theatrical cut. This was very much the same with Justice League, and Snyder struggled with introducing 6 characters and an alien in 2 hours. I think the biggest criticism that everyone lobbies at DC when discussing why they fell short of Marvel is because the latter had several movies setting up all of the characters in the Avengers, so that by the time they met, the studio could just hit the ground running. They also had a bigger runtime too, but Warner Bros. Were clearly trying to force the film to be as profitable as possible at the expense of the film itself. Thus, they ended up butting heads with each other at several points, and when Snyder stepped away, he took his unfinished cut of Justice League on a laptop as a memento to show his friends. As mentioned earlier, reports about Snyder asking for Whedon were completely false, and the work reveals that Joss and Johns were planning a Batgirl movie, which we now know won't be happening. During this period, he had been recruited to do some minor rewrites for Justice League, and Snyder had been hopeful that he could add some cool scenes to it. However, Warner Bros. Slowly gave Whedon more and more power, and he started even directing some scenes during the reshoots. Reeling from their daughter's death and being disappointed with the work that they were producing, both the Snyders quit and called the cast and crew one by one. Ray Fisher, devastated by this moment, discussed it in the article, and he said the following: "I remember I was in a movie theatre, coincidentally enough. I was walking into the AMC right in Times Square, and I got the call from Zack, and he was saying that he had to deal with stuff with the fam and he was having to step away. I had 1,000,000,000,000 questions, my heart sank." From this point onwards, Whedon took the reins and rewrote and reshot 75% of the movie. This was now clearly his film, and the studio weren't too happy with it either. This was actually touched upon in the interview itself, as an anonymous studio exec revealed to Vanity Fair the following: "When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying. The robber on the rooftop, so goofy and awful. The Russian family, so useless and pointless. Everyone knew it. It was so awkward because nobody wanted to admit what a piece of shit it was." This dismay over the project of course carried across to the screen, and since then it's become clear that on set it wasn't all sunshine and snack holes. Ray Fisher has publicly come out and said numerous times that Whedon was abusive and that Warner Brothers also enabled this. Gal Gadot too came forward and said that she had a negative experience with the director, which was reported to higher ups. We now know that Warner Brothers have taken action, though they are tight-lipped over what this entails. However, Whedon has stepped down from his sci-fi show The Nevers, and it doesn't seem like Jeff Johns will be working with the company again. After fans were disappointed across the board by Whedon's take, many wanted to see the original version of the film, and thus a movement on social media started, namely the hashtag #ReleaseTheSnyderCut. Now Snyder does admit that he encouraged this over time, but that it seemed like a pipe dream that wasn't really where his focus was at. After all, it did take 20 years for us to get the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, and it just feels like Snyder wasn't too invested in the movement when it first began. When discussing the year after his departure, the director said the following: "From the time we left, it was not a great year, but we did a lot of stuff with family. It was really important, an important year." Zack decided to take a long time away from Hollywood so that he and his family could heal, but it's clear that his hunger didn't die down. He began working on Army of the Dead, which is due to release later in the year. Scott Stuber, head of films at Netflix, discussed why the studio decided to work with the director, and they said, "Zack went through something very difficult, and I think he probably realized, like we all do, it's okay to be vulnerable. For those of us lucky enough to know him and Deborah, he's a very soulful, kind, thoughtful human being. He's got this facade of big action movies and all these bravado things, but there's a sweet kindness to him." This of course juxtaposes several creators who are now being exposed as being abusive in Hollywood, and even the execs who've often been at opposite ends of the spectrum to Snyder have said that he's a genuinely nice person that crafts a gentle work environment that values the cast and crew. Now as for the laptop with the original cut on, this was devoid of special effects and didn't have a full score. It was also in black and white, and to Snyder it was more just something to show his friends and family. But momentum for the movement continued to grow, and it wasn't too long before everything Warner Brothers put out was hounded by the hashtag. Fans bought planes to fly banners above the studio, and they pooled together money to rent a Times Square billboard advertising the campaign. Gal Gadot and Affleck also called for it to be released, and it wasn't too long before Warner Brothers began to pay attention. During this time, the fanbase also managed to do a lot of positive things, and so far they've raised over $500,000 in charity money for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Now it wasn't too long before the hashtag got seen by Toby Emmerich, who met with Snyder after it trended due to the efforts of the fans and cast. Emmerich said, "A lot of people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of the film because of the circumstances. So if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody." Snyder did state in the article that the studio just wanted to release the black and white footage with no additional effects, but he turned this down. They were a bit put back by this and didn't understand why he wouldn't want it out, to which he replied, "Here's why. 3 reasons. 1, you get the internet off your back, which is probably your main reason for wanting to do this. 2, you get to feel vindicated for making things right, I guess, on some level. And 3, you get a shitty version of the movie that you can point at and go, see, it's not that good anyway, so maybe I was right. I was like, no chance, I would rather just have the Snyder Cut be a mythical unicorn for all time." Now we know this hardball worked, and at the moment it's estimated that the Snyder Cut is up in the region of $70 million in budget. Snyder did clarify that he's not getting a paycheck this time, but for waiving his fee he wants full creative control. It's a pretty smart move too, as if he's not charging anything, then the studio can't threaten to take away the money as an incentive. The other cast members were eager to return too, including Ray Fisher, who said that he's thought about this movie every day for the last 3 years. Cyborg had a much more substantial arc in the original story that fans are delighted we will now get to see. Snyder also isn't beholden to DC's current canon and can take the story wherever he pleases, and this includes a Jesus Joker, which has just been shown in the marketing for the movie alongside this article. Now though this sent some people off into hysterics, I actually think that Snyder is showing he's got the last laugh. Often criticised for using overt Jesus imagery in his movies, he's rolled with it and done the most on-the-nose thing possible to poke fun at his critics, having a Jared Leto Joker dressed up as Jesus while saying we live in a society is such a meme that it's almost impossible to not gawk at how hilarious the idea really is. Snyder has really stopped caring about what his critics think of him, and he's willing to fight back by embracing everything they label him as, which is such a smart move when you ask his fans. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story, and if there's anything we missed then comment below and let me know. I've left the article linked in the description as well if you want to go and read it, as it goes into much more detail and it's a very good read. As a thank you for interacting with the video, you'll be entered into a prize draw on the 28th of February, in which we're giving away 3 copies of the Marvel Phase 3 4K box set to our subscribers. All you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the story. The winners of last month's competition are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of the commercials for WandaVision, which will be linked on screen right now. We went through them all and pointed out all the hidden meanings and messages, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. Out of the way, thank you for sitting through the video. I've been Paul, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.